In the context of the COVID-19 pandemic and increasing economic hardship, I would like to start by acknowledging the efforts of the government of Nicaragua to maintain necessary social spending on health and education, as well as the promotion of gender equality, as indicated in its first National Voluntary Report on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. However, truly sustainable development must encompass the full spectrum of a society's needs. The 2030 Agenda, and especially Sustainable Development Goal 16, constitutes a powerful call for building of peaceful, just, tolerant, and inclusive societies based on the respect for human rights and the effective rule of law. However, as the High Commissioner warned this Council in June and September of this year, the worrying deterioration of civil and political rights during the electoral process resulted in the arbitrary exclusion of many Nicaraguans from participation in the elections, notably those holding views different from the views of the ruling party. However, in Nicaragua, the office documented the arbitrary detention of no fewer than 39 political leaders, human rights defenders, business people, journalists, and peasant and student leaders during the electoral period between May and October. This includes 7 people who had registered as pre-candidates or had publicly expressed their intention to run for president. All of them were detained on the basis of legal provisions incompatible with international human rights standards, as noted by our office and this own Council's special procedure mandate holders. Furthermore, the judicial proceedings to which they were subjected did not adequately respect due process. In the weeks leading up to Election Day, many journalists were denied accreditation and entry into the country, hindering independent coverage of this electoral process. This was in addition to the violations of freedom of the press and the right to information previously documented by OHCHR, including raiding the country's main print newspaper and arbitrary arrests, harassment, and threats of journalists and media workers involved in critical reporting of the government, leading dozens of them to flee the country. All these restrictions and human rights violations created an environment unconducive to genuine and free elections. On the 12th of November, the OAS General Assembly adopted a resolution declaring that, and I quote, "the 7 November elections in Nicaragua were not free, fair, or transparent and lacked democratic legitimacy," end quote. In response, a week later, the government denounced the OAS charter, starting a 2-year process of withdrawal from the OAS. I therefore call on the government of Nicaragua to engage with this council, as well as with the special procedures and other human rights protection mechanisms of the United Nations system. I also urge the government of Nicaragua to urgently restore public rights and freedoms and the impartial rule of law, and to bring its national legislation fully into line with international human rights standards. In this regard, all people arbitrarily detained should be immediately released and have their civil and political rights fully restored. The legal personality of political parties and civil society organizations arbitrarily stripped should also be reinstated. It is equally important to stop the criminal prosecution and harassment of political opponents, journalists, lawyers, and human rights defenders on account of their opinions and beliefs, and to ensure accountability, truth-seeking, and full reparation for victims of serious human rights violations committed since April 2018. I call on the government of Nicaragua to create the conditions necessary for and conducive to a national dialogue based on a roadmap with clear commitments, and to grant OHCHR and other human rights mechanisms necessary access to the country to duly perform our mandates. We remain ready to assist Nicaragua in implementing the recommendations included in our reports.